You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYBC.
WCYTV.
Here on the Daily Signal.
Good evening and welcome to Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC. Whether or not you're joining us via radio, TV, the live streams on YouTube, X, and Rumble, I personally think that the YouTube chat's one of the best because the comments that you send in, they cause me great emotional pain. And then, of course, the podcasting services later. We're thrilled that you're with us because tonight we have got one jam-packed, phenomenal show for you. We're not just phoning this one in because it's a federal holiday and it's Juneteenth. No. We have got all of the goods that are, in fact, we can't really say they're breaking, but they are developing. These are changing in real time. What's changing in real time? First of all, the Democrat Party is in trouble. You say, Tony, look, you're a conservative pundit on broadcast. You say that fairly often. I know, it's true. I do. Because they are in trouble. But they're in a different kind of trouble today. See, we've known for a very long time that the Democrat Party in this country is morally bankrupt. They don't hold nominations properly. They don't hold primaries properly. Their convention is a nightmare when it comes to electing representatives. They have racial and sexual and gender quotas on everything. The things that their senators get behind are morally reprehensible. The moral bankruptcy, we understand it. We got it covered. I hear you. But have I ever told you a little about financial bankruptcy? Because what's breaking out into the open right now is a certified case of not just bankruptcy. No, we're talking about debt so crushing, even Dave Ramsey won't pick up the phone. It's wild. So, according to the New York Times, known for not reporting on chaos in the Democratic National Committee, the DNC is in chaos and desperate for cash. Quote, under its new leader, Ken Martin, Ken Martin, the weird kind of goofy-looking generic white guy who's either a mannequin at Kohl's or the weird state guy from Minnesota. He's the guy they elected to run the Democratic National Committee after the disaster in 24. Given how well Tim Walz did in 24, by the way, you would think that perhaps they wouldn't choose that guy to run the National Party, but they did. Well, he's been plagued by infighting and a drop in big donations. Are you telling me that investors around the country have stopped donating to the DNC? Now, why would that be? And I've received this question a couple of times, so I'm going to hit it right up front. Do I believe that the drop in USAID funding is related to the demise of the DNC? I'm not here to make any unsubstantiated allegations. I have always been taught there are very few coincidences in the world. But aside from those things, let's look on the inside. Quote, just months into the tenure of a new party leader, Ken Martin, the DNC's financial situation has grown so bleak that top officials have discussed whether they might need to borrow money this year to keep paying the bills. This should sound a little familiar to you, and here's why. Kamala Harris finished her campaign in massive amounts of debt. This is not a new problem for the Democratic Party. As early as in 2019, Hal Lambert had been posting that the DNC had raised $8.5 million in June of that year, up to June of 2019. They had $9.3 million in the bank at that time, and they were $5.7 million in debt to various organizations and financial institutions. The RNC in 2019, again, this is before we had Trump leading the party along with her co-chair. Before we had that shift, we were back under Ronald McDaniel, $20.8 million raised in June, $43.5 million in the bank, and they were $0 in debt. Since then, the RNC has expanded its financial base to spend on elections. Now, why is the DNC so strapped for cash? It's kind of a good question, right? So according to fellow Democrats grumbling about Mr. Martin, who also quietly accepted a raise after taking the post, of course, whether it's the BLM movement, whether it's Bernie Sanders and his great campaign for socialism and the pudding, or whether we're talking about the DNC, whenever you step up and take a new role, you got to cash in on a big, juicy raise, because nothing says fighting for the common man like doubling your salary. So he's been badly distracted by internal battles. David Hogg, of course, running around the 25-year-old activist who they elected to be the vice chair of the party, blindsided party officials with a plan to challenge incumbent Democrats. I love this. Made things worse, according to the New York Times. And then, while everyone else was yelling and crying and freaking out about the Israel-Iran situation, the international situation regarding tariffs and negotiations, I pointed out that there was a story no one was covering. The LA riots as well, which we'll get to. There was a story no one was covering that all of the Democrat strategists were really upset about online. To refresh your memory, I was getting ready to hop on a news hit where I was going to debate a Democratic strategist, part of my job. And as I was getting ready for the debate on, I think it was News Nation, I looked up the guy's profile to see what he had tweeted about the LA riots, in case he said something that he would then have to defend, because the LA riots were awful and were completely avoidable by not being a terrible human being. I noticed he didn't actually tweet about the LA riots at all. In fact, most of the Democrat strategists I'd followed were not tweeting about the LA riots. They were freaking out over leaked audio to Politico, showing that Ken Martin was basically about to say, "I quit." And he said, "It's not because I'm stressed, and it's not because, this is a hard position. That's any DNC platform or job." He said, but this infighting is really terrible. No one covered it. And now here we are, a couple of weeks later, really just 1 week later, we're finding out that it's not just that Ken Martin is leaving, maybe, because the infighting, although that certainly is there, they're very bankrupt in the friendship department. They're also bankrupt financially because, again, allegedly, Ken Martin has been cashing out checks to all of the state DNCs around the country and like Guam. So as you remember, I believe Guam went to Trump in the last presidential election, which is a very big rarity for a U.S. territory in its votes. And to rectify this, Ken Martin has done what Democrats do for every failing institution. Whether it's a public school, whether it's a foreign aid program, whether it's Iran, they're like, well, we just need to give them more money. Only the problem is that people like Mark Zuckerberg, who are used to cashing them out big old honkin' checks, are no longer doing so. And one of the reasons they're no longer doing so is because all of those woke little goobers in DEI offices, in HR departments, no longer have the power to cancel the CEO of Coca-Cola or FedEx or insert agency here or organization or corporation here on social media because no one cares anymore. So the Democrat Party is now bankrupt in all three ways. They're morally bankrupt. They have no idea what they're doing. We're going to get into that. They're financially bankrupt. They have no money. And they're also in an internal civil war. A genuine down-the-line split. According to another Politico article, critics of the DNC chair Ken Martin have been calling him, quote, weak, whiny, and invisible. So much for that masculinity thing that I was told these Democrat men had. A bunch of weak, whiny white guys apologizing for their existence don't make good leaders. I know, I'm also shocked. So on the other side of things, the primaries are not going as smoothly as they'd hoped, even though David Hogg has been told essentially to shut his mouth and was then kicked out of being vice chair. In New York City, you have a multiple Democrat mayoral primary that's currently in the mix between guys like Cuomo, who, you'll remember for killing grandmothers and feeling up people in his office, hopefully not the grandmothers. Then open communist Mamdani. And then this other random guy no one really knows of. What's that guy's name? Is it like Baker Har? The guy that faked his arrest. He threw himself at officers. No one knows who that other guy is. He was just in the national news for being arrested. Hochul had to pick him up from daycare, essentially. So those three goofballs. AOC has now released a series of attack tweets on Cuomo. And then, at an event for Mamdani, an openly avowed communist, and not to mention the pro-Palestine stuff, she's going after other members of the Democrat Party at a time when they're in an open civil war. Check it out.
Andrew Cuomo has made clear that if he wins this race, he wants to run for president of the United States of America. And in a world and a nation that is crying to end the gerontocracy of our leadership, that wants a new day, that wants to see a new generation ascend. It is unconscionable to send Andrew Cuomo to Gracie Mansion.
Okay, two amazing claims. By the way, thanks to C. Stone down in the comments section, it is Brad Landers, not to be confused with Ned Flanders. But to AOC's points, her claim that Cuomo can't get in because he's old. I happen to recall AOC doing a lot of campaigning for the corpse Joe Biden. We'll get to that. However, the second point is my favorite. This claim that the country is ready for a bunch of youths to get in and lead. We hear this every single time a generation reaches critical mass in society. So there was a time when the boomers were in their 30s and 40s, and it was Generation X that was starting to come into their own. And there was this big conversation in the 90s that, it's time for Bill Clinton coming into the presidency as a sign that Generation X is ready for newer, younger leadership. And then Clinton, molested his intern. So, you get this every couple of years. Then the millennials came through. Oh, Obama's here. That's the sign that newer, younger, more exciting voices are here for the party. And then he was, a disaster who drone-struck weddings. So then you moved forward. Now here we are with the last of the millennials, yours truly, and Generation Z and I Alpha after. Oh, everyone's ready for new, bold leadership. What we need are the youths of today. So this guy she's talking about, Mom Donnie, the youths of today, what is he? He is an openly avowed communist who wants the city to run grocery stores, like the Soviet Union did, as well as openly defund the New York Police Department by over $1 billion because nothing is safer than the streets of New York, as well as a huge fan of all of those pro-Hamas protests, which I was told, that's not, we're just supporting Palestine and these poor people. Well, now that group is in fact running through the streets of New York City waving the flag of the Iranian regime, which openly beats women and hangs any kind of dissident whatsoever. So you can see, again, not just the Palestine flag, not just a Hamas flag over there in the back, not just the Hezbollah flag, but of course the flag of the Iranian regime. With, by the way, Arabic text explicitly stating that it is for the totalitarian theological regime of Iran. So not even the people of Iran, which if you were going to fly a flag for the people of Iran, you would fly the Iranian flag with the lion on the front of it. Or if you were awesome, you would fly a Persian flag. So none of that. That's the new Democrat youth that they really, really want. That's who's fighting all of the old people. In response, do you have kind of a Sister Soldier moment with Bill Clinton where he tells the insane people to calm down because the party needs to come together? By the way, that's what you're getting from Donald Trump right now. Donald Trump came out in front of the country and essentially told more of the loud and angry members over on the right to relax their slacks, both on the big, beautiful bill and on the Israel-Iran thing. Now, are the Democrats doing this with dissension in the ranks? A far less diverse coalition at the moment? No. Instead, the Democrats have their master strategy for getting out of their trifecta of bankruptcy, their Angel Reese of WNBA records. They've decided to be openly pro-Iran. Excellent stuff. They have decided to expand their coverage and their crying about the immigration enforcement across the country. So there were anti-ICE riots, of course, in Los Angeles. ICE is still active. The National Guard and the Marines are still active in Los Angeles. And in Hollywood today, there was a Home Depot raid in which there was supposed to be a transfer of individuals who were captured, who were criminals, those with criminal records. We don't know too much about the raids yet, so I'm not going to go too much into it. But at one point, the Border Patrol vans left, and we're essentially going to move individuals from Homeland Security vans to Border Patrol vans, or the other way around. I think it's from Border Patrol to Homeland Security vans. And they chose the parking lot of the Dodgers Stadium to do so. And so they did, and then they ended up turning around and leaving. Everything was fine. And the Dodgers then got out in front of the country and said that they had turned Immigration Customs Enforcement away. They wanted access to the Dodgers Stadium, which from what data we have right now, somebody's lying. somebody's lying. And again, from the data on the ground, according to a News Nation reporter earlier on, stated that ICE didn't even show up to the Dodger Stadium whatsoever. So you have LA and the Dodgers and the Democrats claiming that there's some kind of a big moral victory from stopping ICE from going in the empty Dodgers Stadium. Okay. But yet somehow they're going to gain some kind of moral high ground over the country over this. Absolutely not, because we do happen to have these cool things called videos in Portland, which basically has weather that consists of rain, sun, and riots. The clashes are now so intense. Not only are the protesters firing fireworks at police, or the rioters firing fireworks at police, they're gluing shrapnel onto the kind of like the mortar round that the firework adheres to. And then they're firing those essentially homemade grenades at federal authorities. It's extremely intense. Check it out. And still the Democrats are going to try to convince the entire country that these are all just peaceful demonstrations and protests and nothing is wrong at all. They're trying to stand up in different ways. Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, currently under investigation for very blatant mortgage fraud, is investigating different local police and law enforcement agencies in New York State for working with federal forces as they are required by federal law to do. This is according to the New York Post. Letitia James is conducting a misconduct probe of several New York local law enforcement agencies, including Oswego County Sheriff's Office. She's requesting any documents outlining any cooperation between local law enforcement officials and federal agencies, essentially citing this executive order that Cuomo signed when he was in power. And now you've got Kathy Hochul upholding this executive order that forbids state law enforcement from working with the feds. That's not a thing you can do. No offense to Attorney General Todd Rokita here in Indiana. He has no authority to order a sheriff's office not to cooperate with federal and law enforcement. That's not something that you have the power to do. It's just not. There are no state constitutions or Commonwealth constitutions that give any attorney general the power to forbid law enforcement from working with federal forces. How do I know this? Because there was a commission after the Civil War that made sure there were no prospects in state constitutions that didn't allow these things. It was part of the Reconstruction effort. Again, basic history was supposed to be part of your education growing up. A lot of people were picking noses during the whole thing. Representative Judy Chu, we're going to get into the political theater side of things. The next strategy is just to cry. So AOC, a couple of years ago, cried in the parking lot of some random Border Patrol facility. And it was made fun of all over the internet because it was stupid. So the Democrats have decided that to escape this moral, financial, and friendship alliance coalition bankruptcy, that they are going to send all of their representatives and senators out now to make substitute teacher disappointment speech videos like Chuck Schumer does, or be like Representative Judy Chu or Maxine Waters, who gets in front of the country and goes, "I'm locked out and it's fascism." Here's Judy Chu.
I am here to conduct an inspection of the Metropolitan Detention Center and the
I'm going to point out real quick, the door that she is outside of looks like a janitor's closet. I'm begging people on campaign staffs. I know there are Democrat campaign staffers that watch this show. I know you are there because I have the information from the DNC. Don't do this, or actually continue doing this. As a guy on the right side of the aisle, watching you frame videos like this is like a junior high film class for the first time picking up a portable camcorder.
Reason is because 6 Pasadena residents were detained this morning, and we have the right to know what is happening.
Okay, a couple of things. Notice she does not say 6 Pasadena citizens. The word citizen never comes into play. They are not constituents of Representative Judy Chu. Despite the horrible census argument, they are not at all accustomed to any rights that a representative is to give them in Congress. That is supposed to be a benefit of the sovereign citizen. This is outlined in the Federalist Papers. It's outlined in the Anti-Federalist Papers, for that matter. And half of the Supreme Court precedent throughout history of this country is aimed at protecting the rights of sovereign citizens, not Pasadena residents, which just sounds like a really, really, really gay alt band. And up next on stage, it's the Pasadena residents.
With them when they were detained, a young man on Los Robles and Orange Grove at the Winchell's Donut. He took a video of an ICE agent license plate, and the ICE agent.
She doesn't even know the story. So for those of you who are listening, there are these things called jump cuts. Jump cuts, for example, I use in the top news in 10 for the Daily Signal every morning because I try not to just read from a script to do the entire show. I have an outline of points, and then I try to deliver the news within 10 minutes. Well, to keep the video under 10 minutes, because I may mispronounce a word, you have to cut certain things up, and including gaps and ums and misstatements and misspeakings. Or, for example, when you start the top news in 10 by saying it's Wednesday, June 19th instead of Thursday, June 19th, you cut things together. Now, here's the problem. I do this for a living. And so jump cuts are really kind of an expected thing. But even right now, where the show is live, I'm not using jump cuts. She is making one video about something she is supposedly very passionate about. She does not even have her story straight enough to do the video without jump cuts. Remember, this is one of the key points that Republicans made about Joe Biden during the early part of the 2024 election campaign when the corpse was in office. He couldn't release a video without 20 or 30 jump cuts because he could not form a coherent sentence. There's only two reasons that you can't form a coherent sentence. Either number one, you are mentally incapable of doing so, or number two, you have not mentally prepared for the series of statements you're making. Case in point, Representative Judy Chu.
Agent jumped out of the car and pointed at a gun as though he was going to shoot the young man just for shooting a video of that license plate. It's outrageous.
Okay, so an officer, essentially, if someone in Los Angeles, we have individuals on video throwing things at police officers. There is video from Compton in which an individual was supposedly trading gunfire with police during the anti-ICE riots. So if someone essentially pulls out a phone to take a photo and the lighting is poor or the angle is wrong, and what the cop sees is someone holding an object that may look like a firearm, and I hate to tell you that from a distance, black phones held in a weird angle do in fact kind of look a little bit like a firearm depending on how you're holding it. So if the cop gets out and then checks to make sure that you're not going to shoot him and a firearm is present with the law enforcement officer, that's not a bad thing. It just isn't. So she claims that it's fascism and all other kinds of nonsense because, again, that's the only strategy that they have. It's political theater. And, of course, we saw this in Senator Hawley's committee over in the U.S. Senate, in which a bunch of the Democrats didn't even show up. The two of them showed up and then walked out because they're not going to stick around for questions as to whether Joe Biden was a corpse in office. And Republicans are asking questions and are bringing people in, and at least with Comer over in the House, with the likely endpoint of some type of action from the federal government officially nullifying, based on the results of this investigation, all of Joe Biden's pardons, all of Joe Biden's executive orders. That's a very, very, very big deal. By the way, that can include judicial appointments. I'm going to say that again. The auto pen scandal matters because not only are Joe Biden's executive orders and pardons under question, if Joe Biden did not order as the president of the United States, the duly elected member of the federal executive branch as its chief, then also his judicial appointments and the bills he signed into law that theoretically were less than veto strength are null and void. That's a very, very big problem for Democrats. So their plan to get past all this, by the way, it resonated very, very, very heavily with Americans. Polls show that Americans are very interested, not just on the right, but in the independent side of the aisle, and even a lot of Democrats at finding answers to this. You have a lot of Democrats who are still very, very bitter that there was never a primary in the first place. Some of your more hippy-dippy Democrats are more upset that RFK was never allowed to primary Joe Biden. You had individuals who are still upset that Bernie Sanders has been screwed over by the Democrat Party for like 4 elections in a row, and now he is the age of Moses at the end of his life. People are upset about that. They want answers. The Democrats think that by getting up and walking out of the room, that's going to make the Republicans look silly. Okay, maybe if you hadn't just spent all of these resources holding your shadow government hearings, remember those? Remember how they were holding shadow hearings about the Trump administration? And they had one and everyone realized it was really lame, gay, and retarded. And it was only broadcast on C-SPAN 3, down there next to ESPN 8, The Ocho, and Corncob TV. So no one cared they didn't do it again? Yeah, so walking out doesn't in fact help the Democrats out. It looks terrible. And voters are remembering this. We are at a time right now when voters are more engaged in the politics of the United States since before the fall of the Cold War. Before the end of the Cold War, Americans were much more engaged in politics. We've been essentially living off the fats of that victory ever since, despite a slight spike after 9/11. And now Americans, after being screwed over through COVID and being lied to by the media and a host of other things, they're tired of the political theater. They're paying attention. Their memory span is longer than a goldfish. They're not just suckling at the teat of the legacy media ad nauseum. Over in Pete Hegseth's hearing, I'm told you, this is a very power punch-packed episode. We have all of these consistent, new, garbage-filled strategies from the Democrats that are going to get them out of this trifecta of bankruptcy. And the political theater doesn't just stop with the Senate hearings they don't show up to. The Senate hearings the Democrats do show up to are horrible because Donald Trump made a good move. And one of the greatest unsung moves of his administration was nominating and appointing and confirming through the Senate people in his cabinet that do not take crap from Democrat senators and Democrat House members in committee, who are used to doing the political theater. They get on camera and go, "You're a very bad person, aren't you? When did you stop beating your wife?" Remember what they did in the Kavanaugh hearings? Remember what Kamala Harris did in the Kavanaugh hearings? So Trump appointed a bunch of bulldog mavericks that aren't going to take it sitting down. And the Democrats are losing it in committee. And it's hilarious to watch because they have done this to themselves. So Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, who the Democrats thought they would walk all over and called, this drunken goober who didn't know what he was doing. Right now, the Department of Defense appears to be really on the ball. I will remind you that American troops were actually evacuated in large part from several key places in the Middle East without getting 13 U.S. troops dead at Abbey Gate. We have a competent Secretary of Defense that's not taking unannounced hiatuses for prostate exams and surgeries. He actually understands the chain of command. And this very much upsets those in the Democrat committees. For example, Jackie Rosen. You know what? We'll save Jackie Rosen for a minute here. First of all, Elisa Slotkin, who gave the response to the Trump State of the Union style address. Remember from Michigan, she was going to be the new face of the Democrat Party. And it turned out that people really don't like liberal, suburban, white liberal moms who lecture everyone all the time about everything and are about as fun as AIDS. So Elisa Slotkin gets into it with Pete Hegseth and gives him a leading question. And so Hegseth doesn't take the bait, and she just loses her mind over it because the only books that she reads, like The Handmaid's Tale.
Not want citizens to be scared of their own military. I love the military. I served alongside my whole life, so I'm worried about you tainting it. Have you given the order? Have you given the order that they can use lethal force against honor? I want the answer to be no. Please tell me it's no. Have you given the order?
Senator, I'd be careful what you read in books and believing it, except for the Bible.
Oh my God. So your former predecessor, I guess that's not enough for you. Okay, on Iran.
I love it. I mean, it's the sheer stupidity of this woman is fantastic. It's amazing because she gives him a leading question. Please tell me it's no. She is a senator of the Armed Forces Committee. She can pull up his orders. They're on record. Every order given from a Secretary of Defense is kept on file. And everyone with security clearance, which includes all 50 bleeping senators, all 100 bleeping senators, are given open, clear, unfiltered access to every order given by the Secretary of Defense. And the Chief of Staff, by the way. She knows the answer to that. She doesn't want the real answer to that. So when Hegseth calls her out for essentially grandstanding, she loses her mind. Jackie Rosen, does what a lot of these Senate Democrats have done. They just immediately go into lecture mode and they just start saying, Hegseth, you're a terrible, evil person. In fact, you're really awful. Everyone looks around because what Senate and House committees were originally designed for was for members of the House and the Senate to ask questions publicly that could then be reported to the rest of the country. It was a measure of accountability. You ask questions. Instead, this is like micro political grandstand theater. The right and the left do this quite a bit, but when they get pushback from it, you get some fireworks. And so Jackie Rosen decides to try to go in for the kill and runs out of time, and Hegseth just kind of trolls her a little bit, and it's pretty great.
Influence personnel decisions in your department, yes or no?
I believe your time is up, Senator.
Oh, it is not up to you to tell me when my time is up.
Well, the time.
And I am going to say, Mr. Secretary, you're either feckless or complicit. You're not in control of your department. You're unserious. It is shocking. You're not combating anti-Semitism.
How dare you? It's not up to you to tell me when my time of the month, when my time is up. I'm a strong, straight woman with ideals. You've been combative, and also you didn't compliment my lipstick, you bastard.
Within your ranks, it's a dangerous and pivotal.
It's a danger doodly DiGiorno.
Time in our nation's history. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back, and I don't appreciate this.
And I don't appreciate my soup being cold after I sent it to the kitchen 3 times.
Smirk, sir. You are the secretary.
The smirk. I don't appreciate the smirk on your face while I lecture you. You go to the corner and put on the dunce cap.
Secretary of Defense.
The time of the gentleman.
And then he continues, the chair of the committee then continues to say, by the way, you are out of time. Yeah, you're out of time. Again, it's if you want time to answer questions, then ask the questions. If you spend all 7 of your minutes, see, it's amazing when you read the Robert's Rules of Order, you know how many minutes are kind of on the line. When you spend that time just asking nothing, just giving a lecture about why you hate things, and then right at 6 minutes and 58 seconds, you drop in one question and he doesn't answer it, that ain't his fault, it's yours. Love it so much. I really do. Senator Mazie Hirono, who is likely the lowest IQ member of the Senate, which is that's a low bar. My goodness. Mazie Hirono steps up to do exactly what I've been saying. This is the lecture roulette.
This troop deployment is purposefully inflaming and escalates tensions. You claim lethal.
By the way, a little point of grammar here. Inflaming and escalating tensions, or it inflames and escalates. You don't mix a gerund with a present part. Sorry.
Lethality is your top priority. Do you plan to unleash this lethal force against U.S. citizens and civilians in LA and other cities?
Well, Senator, I would reject most of the characterization of that statement, including lethality against U.S. cities, when all of those National Guardsmen and Marines have conducted themselves with the utmost of professionalism, defending our federal agents, Americans, who deserve to be able to do their job to deport illegal immigrants after the previous administration allowed 21 million illegals to cross our border.
I love that. Reclaiming my time. I am not here to listen to you. Yes, you are. Actually, that's the point of the committee. I am here to ask questions and you answer them and I listen to the answer. And then, by the way, originally how this is set up, and we can tell because we have the notes all the way back to the Continental Congress, after a committee series of questions for each individual, you're not even supposed to give your answers of, well, I thought that question went very well. You're just supposed to ask questions, they give the answers, and then you discuss it in a follow-up committee later among the senators and the representatives. But see, that doesn't get very many ratings on CNN in ways that you can raise fundraising emails out to everyone. Shout out to Senator Padilla. So from that side, the Senate's just doing great. The political theater. Jasmine Crockett then went on The View. Every time Jasmine Crockett speaks in public, I thank God on high, because Jasmine Crockett is truly a national treasure for the right side of the aisle. Democrat Representative Jasmine Crockett from Texas gets up in front of the country on The View, a perfect storm, to complain about Donald Trump, who has again been under multiple attempted assassinations. having security. I'm not joking. Here you go.
Well, over the weekend, we actually saw a tragic and brazen act of political violence in this country. A Minnesota Democratic representative and her husband and their dog were assassinated. Another lawmaker and his wife were gravely wounded. And the suspect reportedly had a long hit list. So I want to ask you, do you feel safe as an elected official in this political climate?
No, not at all. I mean, here's the deal. I do this job, and the fact that my safety is a part of doing this job is really bad in and of itself. Yeah. But while we spend millions upon millions just so that this guy can go and golf, or while they spent $45 million for his little birthday parade.
Jasmine Crockett, by the way, voted against condemning the Gaza pier, which sunk to the bottom of the Mediterranean. The hundreds of millions dollar Gaza pier, talking about Trump going places and the military parade.
You know, like, I'm just saying, can we reprioritize some of those dollars?
Reprioritize. Got it.
When they killed our continuing resolution this last time, one of the things they didn't take out is that they had included an additional, I believe, $10 million to protect non-justices. I'm like, listen, I'm not even asking for $1 million, but can we get something? Because we have nothing.
That's not true, by the way.
The only people in the House that have protection, you get protection based upon your leadership post.
You also get protection based on the risks and the threats to your life. Again, it's very explicitly stated. It's in House committee. It's very open. There are procedures, essentially. Again, there are rules, procedures that are voted on in the House. Though, like the one that says that Representative Sarah McBride is not allowed to use the girls' room. That's something voted on by the House. They have their own little procedures and rules. One of those things includes a threat assessment-based security detail. So if you're like Rand Paul, who has been attacked, then yeah, you get a little bit more security detail. But if you don't get any threats and attacks, with Jasmine Crockett currently wearing the skin of Big Bird, shoulder pads hiked up about 15.5 inches. I'm sorry. If you're a politician trying to be taken seriously and you dress as though you just skinned a Muppet, I'm not impressed. I'm just, nobody's taking you seriously.
That's it. Those are the only ones. And so when you figure out security, you have to hopefully raise enough money to then be able to pay for security yourself.
That's also not true.
This is a problem, especially in light of the environment. And so I did text a Republican that I consider to be a friend. Yes, I have Republican friends, just so y'all know.
All three of them.
I did, and I said, listen, your people need to fix this. Like, I'm tired, right? And
why didn't she vote for that while the Democrats were in power? I mean, she is a very recent member of Congress, to be fair. But I will ask for the boys, girls, and squirrels of the audience, why is it only when the Democrat... Again, let's look at some of the attacks recently. Have we had a lot of attempted attacks on Democrat members of Congress? No. No, we haven't. The one time that there were state Democrats in Minnesota that were targeted, and again, the one representative and spouse killed, the other two gravely wounded. It was a horrible act, and that man should be publicly hanged who did so. Publicly hanged. Not a lethal injection, not 60 years of taxpayer-funded timeout. Hanged. However, I seem to notice that Jasmine Crockett never once condemns the political assassination attempts, never once condemns the fire bombings, never once condemns the open assassinations in places like Washington, D.C., or from Luigi Mangione in New York City. None of those. The Los Angeles riots, the Portland riots, the Chicago riots, the New York riots, the Atlanta riots, and on and on and on and on. None of that. Instead, she practices her fake accent and, again, goes on a trophy hunt for the Sesame Street Safari. And they think this is going to work. Carolyn Levitt, by the way, did respond to this later with a good friend and colleague of mine, Mary Margaret Olahan. Very good from today's press briefing.
Thank you. And then really quick on Jasmine Crockett, she said, I believe, that Trump supporters are mentally ill before calling for bipartisan support against the president. Can you respond to that, especially considering she's a rising star in the Democrat Party right now?
She is a rising star. It's quite something to behold, actually. I hope that she continues to be a rising star for the Republican Party, at least. I think it's incredibly derogatory to accuse nearly 80 million Americans of mental illness. The last time I checked, Jasmine Crockett couldn't dream of winning such a majority of the public as President Trump did.
That's correct. That's correct. So again, the front runners of the party right now, they got Jasmine Crockett, they got AOC, they have Pete Buttigieg, and then they've got Kamala. Okay. All right. Good luck with that. Of course, they're going all in on the LGBTQ stuff. When I say that the Democrat Party is in complete panic, I do mean they are, in fact, in complete panic. Because the Democrat Party, as many of us know, and I've been, look, my grandmother raised me when it came to politics. We've had a lot of long political conversations. And if there is one thing that I know, all the way back to my youth and listening to Rush Limbaugh describe the exact same process, things that were in the Wall Street Journal for a very, very long time during the Reagan administration, all the way back to the Eisenhower administration, for the record, over in the Post, that Democrats are known for being unified on mission. They are known for always focusing on the exact same thing. That is what they do, from the media side all the way over to the policy side, to the fundraising side, to the officials, all of it. One focus. This is the exact opposite. There's a lot of reasons for that. But it is incredible to watch the Supreme Court of the United States rule what, according to every single poll, is a very popular thing: banning transgender experimentation on minors, which Tennessee did, 26 other states have done. The Supreme Court ruled transgender people, because you can choose whether to be transgender like a metronome, it's not a protected class. It is not an inherent immutable characteristic. There is not one scientific study which says so. Additionally, there's not one scientific study, not one, which suggests that giving a child hormonal blockers provides long-term mental health. Not one. In fact, it's likely very carcinogenic. And so all of the Democrats have now come out to express their extreme anger. Cory Booker, when he's not, refraining from pooping and yelling for 24 hours straight on the floor of the Senate, he's throwing out videos talking about how important it is to him that they all go in for the trans children.
No trans children. I hear the fear. I hear the worry that they're not safe. Think about this for a second. The number one killer of children in America is gun violence.
That's not true. The number one killer of children in America is abortion.
They talk about that, the threat there? No. Singling out less than 1% of our population who has the highest rates of bullying, threats of violence. Heck, about 30% of LGBTQ kids, period, report missing school because of fear, and they made them the center of their political campaign.
Again, not true. That's a deflection.
Teaches me to love everyone. What that means is you lead with a more courageous empathy for the struggles of trans children.
Okay, so just real quick here. As to the faith that he's referencing, I'm assuming he's talking about like a Christian faith. That's what I assume. Is that my faith teaches me to love everyone. Okay, loving someone does not just mean affirming everything that they do. It does not. If I see a child who is like 12 years old and they walk into the room smoking a pack of Marlboro Reds, as all children do, and I say, you know what, you make your own decisions, that's great. I am not loving that child. That is not how that works. If there is a child that is struggling with anorexia or bulimia, and they are not eating, and they are wasting away because of a mental illness, and I tell them, well, I bet, if you really identify as thin, you're willing to do anything that you can do to get there, good for you. Loving means saying whatever you think is good. That's not love. That's not what Scripture teaches is love either. As for the argument of the woman at the well that is often brought up, or in general, when Christ talks with sinners, and Christ did love sinners and does, the argument that means that he affirmed all of their life choices because he ate with publicans and sinners is not an endorsement of their sins, because you know what comes after that? Quote, go and sin no more. Christ came to redeem sinners, not to encourage them to sit in that sin forever. So as for the weaponization of faith here, it's ridiculous. As a sinner that Christ redeemed, I can say that if Christ just came to staple me down and encourage me to stick in that lifestyle, Paul, Peter, and John talk about this later in the New Testament, then if you're dead in sins, then salvation means nothing. Then what do you need it for? What do you need Christ to die for your sins and be raised from the dead as a sacrifice in the sight of God, according to the Christian faith? What do you need that for if what you're doing is perfectly fine? That's not how any of that works. And of course, you have senators everywhere tweeting at Senator Markey, trans rights are human rights, and all this other kinds of gobbledygook. It's not true. The Trump administration also cut off funding for this group called the Trevor Project, which they called a suicide prevention service, which is not, in fact, true at all. The Trevor Project is not. According to Nikki Neely over at Parents Defending Education, it is a very well-funded activist group pushing policies that keep parents in the dark and insert pro-transgender affirmative ideology directly into K-12 school counseling curriculum, counseling pedagogy, as well as academic curriculum. So to be extremely clear, the Democrats running around now saying Republicans have cut off the suicide hotline. No, they have not. So this is the plan. This is their big strategy, their big move. It really isn't going to work at all. It's just not. Now that brings us over to kind of the final 2 points here, which are how the media is addressing things, and then what Republicans are actually doing that is apparently ridiculously popular. It's a really wild thing to see. So the Democrats are trying, in the meantime, as their big strategy is to claim that, well, the right, like the MAGA people in the Republican Party, they're in a huge civil war right now over the big, beautiful bill. And they're in a huge civil war over Israel and Iran. And they're in a huge civil war over immigration. No, the polls do not show that. What is currently going on in the Republican Party is a very diverse group of people who worked together to win an election are now finding out the consequences of having a diverse coalition governing. You have a diverse coalition of New York Republicans, very, very moderate, mixed with independent fundamental Baptists from Tennessee and Georgia, mixed with Rust Belt Republicans from places like Michigan, shout out to Representative John James, mixed with libertarian guys like Thomas Massey, Rand Paul, mixed with populist people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. It turns out that you actually have to find compromises and argue out in the open different policy perspectives. That's a good thing. And unlike the Democrats, who will argue this in the back room and then remove anyone from existence who decides to dissent, Republicans are arguing this out in the open. And it's crafting better policy. The big, beautiful bill has gone through revision in the Senate that has resulted in a lower SALT deduction, which is more popular with the rest of the country. On Israel and Iran, the Trump administration is holding their cards very closely to the chest, as well as focusing towards open communication on how much intervention to participate in regarding the Israel-Iran war. These are open conversations that are happening. It's a good thing. It is. Sorry. It's not a civil war. A civil war is a current ousting of the vice chair of the DNC and complete bankruptcy because the leader of the DNC is picking different state and territory DNC groups to throw money at before he's completely out of money while taking a raise himself. Now, Jake Tapper and the media are in a rough place because they can't just deny everything that is happening in the Democrat side of the aisle. They can't simply whistle past the graveyard and hope no one pays attention because of the Joe Biden scandal. Here's Jake Tapper making this point again just yesterday.
George Orwell once wrote that, quote, "We are all capable of believing things which we know to be untrue. And then when we are finally proved wrong, impudently twisting the facts so as to show that we were right. Intellectually, it is possible to carry on this process for an indefinite time. The only check on it is that sooner or later, a false belief bumps up against a solid reality, usually on a battlefield." Now, when George Orwell wrote that, he was talking about World War II. He wrote, quote, "The Germans and the Japanese lost the war quite largely because their rulers were unable to see facts which were plain to any dispassionate eye." And then he said, and this is one of my favorite quotes ever, "To see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle." And that's the lesson for me.
Now, here's the fun thing. President Obama, or former President Obama, thank God, has now come out and said essentially the exact opposite. President Obama has called for the former President Obama has called for the media instead to essentially create their own Ministry of Truth, which, as the guy who runs the Twitter satire account called the U.S. Ministry of Truth, I will never stop giggling at Democrats' desperation to return to controlling the media narrative entirely, as though that will be popular. The dam has broke. It ain't going back. It's not. This is worse than Humpty Dumpty. You're not putting it back together. But regardless, here is Barack with his statement.
But part of what we're going to have to do is to start experimenting with new forms of journalism and how do we use social media in ways that reaffirm facts, separate facts from opinion. We want diversity of opinion.
You do not.
We don't want diversity of fact, by the way.
There's no such thing as diversity of fact, by the way. That's called different angles of reporting. Now, the statement, two things can be true at once, is again, different angles of reporting. One fact does not cancel out the other. But I do enjoy, and I don't know if you noticed this, producer Nick, this sounds like again, kind of the elder, like when they'll have a committee hearing and they'll bring in and they'll be like, so tell me, Mark Zuckerberg, the internet is a series of tubes. Why can't I remember my gosh dang email password? That's what Obama sounds like here. He's become the old crotchety man shaking his cane and going, why don't you kids just use the Facebooks?
It will require some government, I believe, some government regulatory constraints.
Hang on a second here. While I was making fun of Obama, I missed this. We're going to back it up a bit. Obama's talking about using media, using journalism, using social media, and then he says, what?
Facts, separate facts from opinion. We want diversity of opinion. We don't want diversity of fact. By the way, it will require some government, I believe, some government regulatory constraints.
Regulatory constraints on what? On what? What are the regulatory constraints on? Would this be speech?
Around some of these business models in a way.
Look at the people clapping for him. Oh, look, it's the Connecticut for him, of course. I freaking hate Connecticut. Everyone talks about the state they want to chop off and like float into the ocean. For me, it would not be California, it would be Connecticut. Sorry for those who are listening from Connecticut. I just have been deeply unsatisfied with everything about Connecticut for the last couple of years.
That's consistent with the First Amendment, but that also says, look.
Wait a minute. Consistent with the First Amendment, but you don't stick a but after the First Amendment. You say and after the First Amendment.
Regulatory constraints around some of these business models in a way that's consistent with the First Amendment, but that also says, look, there is a difference between
Go on.
These platforms letting all voices be heard.
What?
Versus a business model that elevates the most hateful voices.
You mean like when Twitter banned anyone questioning the COVID restrictions? You mean like when Twitter, or like, for example, yesterday when Blue Sky banned Vice President J.D. Vance? Like that?
Or the most polarizing voices, or the most dangerous in the sense of inciting violence.
Inciting violence. You mean like the what was the exact words of the Blue Sky Post? We need to kill a Supreme Court justice. Ah, yes.
Voices. And that I think is going to be a big challenge for all of us that we're going to have to undertake.
Okay. Thanks to Jim Paff over at the Conservative Caucus for sending that one over to us. Wow. Okay. Have they learned any lessons? No. Are they going to do anything different? No. Instead, the panic is just going to manifest in far scarier, crazier action. Now, what are Republicans up to right now? Well, pretty dang popular stuff. So ICE is continually receiving support from mainstream Republicans. House Speaker Mike Johnson toured the Immigration Customs Enforcement Facility in Chicago and said that the Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson's on the wrong side of the law. Excellent stuff. Border Patrol is finding massive success shutting down the drug trade. A major drug smuggling tunnel between Tijuana and San Diego. By the way, remember when Republicans were made fun of by suggesting there were drug tunnels? Whoops. And then, of course, the visa investigation that right now, people who apply for visas in the United States, their social media and political histories will be observed in case, they're coming into the country to incite violence, like, the terror attack in Boulder, Colorado. Here's the Daily Signal's Elizabeth Mitchell asking Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt about that earlier today.
Elizabeth, go ahead. Sorry, I skipped you earlier.
Okay, thank you so much. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced new vetting procedures on student visas. Will this serve as a model for vetting other foreign visas?
For all foreign visas, yes. As you know, the president signed an executive order, I think it was one of the first he signed in the first week, to strengthen our vetting requirements and our vetting system here in the United States for all visas. He directed the Secretary of State to do that. There was a pause in some of that vetting, as you all know, recently, especially with respect to students from some certain countries. But the vetting has continued, and it's stronger than ever before. As for specifics on how the vetting process has changed, I would defer you to the Department of State.
So that is, in fact, an incredibly popular opinion with the American people. The Iranian position the Trump administration has currently taken is an incredibly popular opinion with the American people. The Trump administration is doing a phenomenal job of combating leaks. I said this on the show, if not yesterday, the day before, and I was proven right, and I'm so thrilled about it because you guys know I'm such a humble broadcaster. So the Trump administration was suffering in its first administration from all of these leaks. Someone in the State Department, in the FBI, in the NSA, in the CIA, in the IRS, in the DOE, and the other DOE would make some kind of leak to a major outlet that would essentially create no room for the Trump administration to move. And this is the worst in military situations, because if you don't have the element of surprise, then your enemy has time to work, and it ends up putting U.S. troops in significant danger. So we get into this administration. The Trump administration has been cleaning out a lot of individuals in various federal agencies who aren't worth keeping around, these unelected bureaucrats. But there are still a couple of leaks coming out. And Trump is really annoyed by this. And so what I had believed at the time was happening, that the administration was sending out little bits and pieces of varying information. Maybe Trump's going to strike Iran tonight. Maybe Trump is going to invite the Ayatollah here for smoothies and tea. Maybe the Trump administration is going to send the Ayatollah to fight in Ukraine. All of these various little rumors. And then you would get a little blip. The New York Times has just reported Trump might strike Iran in 33 and a half minutes in the Wall Street Journal. Trump says he's not going to strike until this weekend. And then the next day, the Trump team comes out and says, you know, they're really stupid. They get out here and they say they know the mind of Trump. No one knows the mind of Trump. Only me, Donald Trump. That's the guy that has the mind of Trump. And this fake news media, they don't know what they're talking about. And then he is asked, well, what are you going to do, Mr. President? He's like, yeah, like I'm telling you, you big nerd. And then he goes on about his business. And it truly is one of my favorite parts of this particular administration, because it would be incredibly damaging for United States foreign policy if the president just telegraphed all of his punches and then, you know, those responsible for the Abbey Gate bombing were able to get away because, you know, Biden telegraphed what he was going to do 72 hours in advance.
Facilities. Where's your mindset on that?
I can't say that, right? You don't seriously think I'm going to answer that question. Will you strike the Iranian nuclear component? And what time exactly, sir? Sir, would you strike it? Would you please inform us so we can be there and watch? I mean, you don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't.
And now, by the way, later that evening, and I loved this. I reported this on the top news in 10. Exclusive. President Trump told senior aides he approved attack plans for Iran, but is holding off on giving the final order to see if Tehran will abandon its nuclear program. And then 40 minutes later, the New York Times had this Iranian official, Iran would accept President Trump's offer to meet very soon, all of this nonsense. At 9:05 a.m. this morning Eastern, Trump put on Truth Social, the Wall Street Journal has no idea what my thoughts are concerning Iran. I love it. I love it. Tony Kinnett is right again, Jar. Put another coin in for those of you keeping track at home. It's a good way to deal with leakers. It is. No one has any idea what's going on now. Now, this is helped in part by one thing that I abhor in media, and this is the unnamed, anonymous sources. This official said this official said that. When you reach out as a reporter, or as I was, an investigative columnist, and you say, hey, I'm reporting on this story. We believe you guys are involved in some sketchy stuff. What is your response? And they'll say, well, okay. And they start telling you what's going on. I say, oh, wait a minute. You have to refer to me as an unnamed official here at Northwestern University because I don't want anyone to know it's me. This has become quite a popular thing in media. where the New York Times, the Washington Post, the New York Post, even the Wall Street Journal, a bunch of Middle Eastern outlets, European outlets, the whole gamut, you know what I'm talking about. They'll say, unnamed source official inside the Ministry of Defense Department, etc., has said Donald Trump is going to nuke Iran in 15 minutes. Story goes viral. Here's an idea. I'm told, unnamed source this and defense official stuff that and all this other kinds of nonsense. How about you anonymous source up a girl to talk to and leave the rest of us alone until you have somebody that's willing to go on record? I'm sorry, I'm not going to share freedomeagle.facebook/Hillary Clinton AIDS suggested that one Iranian official is defecting to Pakistan. Oh no, get out of here. And as long as those two things persist, the Democrats have nothing. They got nothing. Because they can't stir up national outrage after Johnny at the New York Times has cried wolf for the 43rd time this week. Who else do they have on their media arm? Cory Booker getting out in front of the public looking constipated, talking about how actually transgenderism is the true way to Christianity. All right. Good luck with this. Good luck with this, because, again, the Republicans in this broad, diverse coalition are largely taking the 80-20 side of the issue. They're taking the 80 side of the 80-20 issue. Democrats are smacking themselves in the face, throwing themselves at Pete Hegseth, yelling at candidates in their own primaries who have far more support and aren't openly avowed communists, flying Iran flags on U.S. streets now, committing attempted murder on federal officials in Los Angeles and Portland. Oh, yes. That's the move right there. In fact, take it, just round of applause, please. Wonderful stuff. I cannot fathom why that's not popular with the American people. Originally, I was planning on going over to an interview tonight with Hudson Crozier of the Daily Caller News Foundation, a news story, of course, about a San Francisco chapter head of the SEIU, the union that was losing its mind and definitely not a part of the riots in Los Angeles. It turns out the chapter head of the SEIU for San Francisco is a convicted child molester. Of course. So what we're going to do instead, we're going to play that interview for the top news in 10 for tomorrow. It's a great interview. You're not going to want to miss it. That's on the Daily Signal's YouTube channel, youtube.com/Daily Signal. With that said, subscribing to us really helps us out. It's a very, very great time to be with you. So before I go, and just in all sincerity, I really want to thank those who tuned in this evening. I know it was kind of an unusual show. Just a quick word from our sponsors. If you or a loved one are turning 65 soon, you're going to want to hear about how my partner, Chapter Medicare, is saving people thousands of dollars. Unfortunately, being the government boondoggle that it is, Medicare enrollment is a maze of misinformation. And the victims are everyday Americans, parents, grandparents, including those of Chapter's founders. That's why they have vowed to go the extra mile to do right by customers. Chapter's advisors listen carefully, compare every plan, and help you maximize your savings. People are relieved when they talk to Chapter, even making a typically annoying process easy and enjoyable. Working with Chapter is simple, helps save you a ton of money, and saves you days and days of research. These guys won't push you to buy a plan that you don't want, and their support is completely free. So if you or someone you know is turning 65 soon, call them up. You won't regret it. In fact, most people only regret not calling Chapter first. So call the number on the screen. That's 415-787-4074, or visit askchapter.org/Tony. Again, thanks to Chapter for sponsoring the show. We'll be back tomorrow, same great time, same great place. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC. Take care.